I just got back my Spotify Wrapped analytics for the year, and I wanted to go over them with y'all so that I can just express my gratitude towards everyone that's listened to the podcast and my appreciation. I can't thank y'all enough for tuning in every week to show me some love. Now, my numbers aren't outrageous or nothing crazy, but they're very, very important to me, and I'm so glad of what I've created with my podcast so far, and it's only up from here. Thank you very, very much to everyone that has listened or that will listen in the future. It means a lot to me. My whole goal with the podcast is to teach as many people as possible because I know what it can do and how it can impact somebody's life. The whole idea of the podcast is just to help people get started on their fitness journey. Hopefully you've taken something from one of my podcast episodes. If not, you need to check it out. The Fitness Beginner Podcast. It's on all podcasting platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast at. Before we hop into my 2023 statistics, I want to give y'all an idea of how big my podcast actually is. I have run a small fitness podcast that I started just a year ago in 2022. And as of right now, I have 5,024 plays. I average 31 plays per episode. My audience size is 59. I have 2,221 Spotify impressions, whatever that means. And I have 59 Spotify followers. Now, keep in mind that these analytics are just from Spotify. This don't include the YouTube or Facebook where I also post my live streams of my podcast. So these numbers are a little lower than what they actually would be, but these are the analytics that I get from my podcasting service. So that gives you an idea of how big my podcast actually is. So let's hop into my analytics from the year 2023. 98% of my listeners discovered me in 2023. That's a lot. That's basically all of my listeners. I started the podcast in 2022. My number one episode was the very first episode that I ever did. It was Consistency is Key. And that makes sense because most people start a podcast at episode number one. So that's why episode number one was the most. This is a pretty interesting stat to me that I was pretty proud of this one. I was streamed in 33 different countries. The United States was my top country, obviously, because that's where I live. But 33 countries is a lot. I couldn't even name 33 countries. Those top 5 countries were the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and Belgium. So it's pretty cool. I got people listening all over the world. That makes me proud. For the year of 2023, my podcast had a 5-star rating. I'm super proud of this one. No, I don't have very many ratings, but hey, a 5-star rating, that means a lot to me. Thank you so much to everybody that left a rating. And if you haven't left one yet, feel free to leave one. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen at. For the year of 2023, my podcast had an increase of 426% listeners. I had an increase of 578% streams from the previous year. I had an increase of 292% followers from the previous year. And I had an increase of 291% minutes created on the podcast from 2022. So my podcast was a top 10 podcast for 97 fans. I was a top 5 podcast for 55 fans. And I was a top 1 podcast for, drum roll please, 17 fans. I know that's not a very high number, but that's good for me. I started the podcast from scratch, had 0 listeners, and now I was 17 people's number 1 podcast for the year of 2023. That's an awesome number to me. I'm super proud of that, and we're only going up from here. Hey, you may be thinking 17 people, really? Like, come on now. Hey, that's 17 more number 1 fans that I have than you have. Don't hate on me. Those are my analytics for the year of 2023 for the Fitness Beginner Podcast. I can't thank you enough if you've listened to the podcast before. And if you haven't, I highly suggest you check it out. The podcast is to help people get started on their fitness journey. Even if you're starting from scratch or if you've been working out for a little while, basically anyone can get some value from this podcast. Tune in on Mondays. I go live for the podcast. And hopefully you can get some value just like everyone else that's listened to the podcast. Once again, thank y'all so much for listening. I'm super, super proud of where I've come with the podcast, and I'm definitely going to keep going in 2024. I look forward to doing big and better things. Y'all stay tuned in 2024 because we're going to keep dropping some value each and every week so y'all can get better and y'all can achieve y'all's goals. Tune in next week for another episode of the Fitness Beginner Podcast. Peace, love, protein. We out.